Because no one knows what it's like to be a hen. And the question of what it is like to be a hen is an incredibly good conversation for a barbecue. More broadly, this year requires an additional decision which goes beyond the personal choice that you will make after assessing all the facts. That decision isn't just about personal choice, it's a question of market failure and whether or not caged eggs should be banned. All I can hope is that it isn't the values of the few that are imposed upon the lives of the many. So I've given you a brief snapshot of what the activist sector's core thesis will be, and I hope I've provided a bit of a window into what the rest of the year looks like. These are certainly the issues that I'll be grappling with, trying to respond to, and I think it's appropriate that they're called out, debated, held up to the light and assessed. So where does all this leave us? In my old post at New South Wales Farmers, a member once said to me regarding the public debate on animal welfare that we needed to learn to embrace complexity. I think that's right. It's also incredibly difficult. Farmers are driving along the animal welfare road, putting every waking hour into the health and well-being of the hen. They're maintaining a steady wheel, keeping an eye on the speed, and trying not to be completely depressed by the guy in the lane opposite who is saying that they don't deserve a licence at all. I mean, it's hard enough for us to just tune the radio. I hope today has provided a different perspective on the forthcoming debate, and I hope that it serves as a measure of accountability for our critics. Too often we respond to allegations rather than asking whether or not the allegations are accurate in the first place. The road is rugged in and of itself. It is made more rugged by the arguments of others. And when those arguments are tested, they are simply not made out. My remarks today don't serve to remediate the damage to the road or to describe how farmers will deal with the ongoing conjecture. Though I would say that I think more than ever before, egg farmers from across Australia are ready and willing and eager for a conversation with the public that tells the story of what welfare means to them. We might be unable to escape the potholes, but we can try and make this debate more informed by highlighting some of the potholes ahead. And we get that it isn't simple. Nothing is simple when we're configuring as a society and as a culture where to draw the thin red line on animal welfare. But we do stand ready to be unmoved, unemotional, and unapologetic about conveying that experience of the farmer. That experience of the farmer and her hens. Because that experience should be a key focus of this debate, and it is an experience that is getting buried and is getting lost. Beyond that, we need to keep talking. So my challenge to you all today is to talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues, talk to your families about the campaigning that will be coming your way. I don't think it's going to miss anyone. Don't be distracted by what is coming down the line. Know your facts if you can be bothered. Be informed if you're interested. And at every opportunity, try to do what we should be doing this year, and that's having an actual debate about what each of us believes. Deny and reject the attacks on agricultural departments, and if you're interested in challenging yourself and your knowledge, read into the science and decide what you believe. More important than anything else I've said today, get to more barbecues. Thanks for having me. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, John. I don't think you've done yourself any favours to getting more invites to barbecues. So, a couple of questions. Just name, use the protocol.
From GHD. Thanks, John. Firstly, who are the main activists, and does that include RSPCA? And secondly, what is the role of QA programs such as Egg Standards Australia in the welfare debate?
So I might take the second part of that question first while I figure out how to answer the first. I think that the role of QA is incredibly important in articulating to the community what it is that we do. I think that my utilisation of the barbecue stoppers is just a broader demonstration of the fact that generally metropolitan audiences know bugger all about farming. Now QA is not just a window into what we do, it's also a way to demonstrate the standards that we comply with. Now, for me, quality assurance goes beyond the quality of the product. It's a demonstration of the quality of farming, and through that, it demonstrates the quality of animal welfare. So I think Egg Stands Australia is a particularly useful window into that, and I think more broadly, there's many other QA programs across multiple supply chains that could be brought to life as a way of communicating to the public that animal welfare isn't just one issue that we deal with, it's central to what we do. So I think it's got a huge role to play, and it's a matter of figuring out a way to bring that to life and articulate it to consumers that are interested. With respect to your first question, who are the activists, and does that include the RSPCA? What I would say is that there are a variety of activists, and it's a growing and thriving sector. With respect to the RSPCA, we have strong and robust relationships with some RSPCA bodies. We have a great dialogue with the New South Wales RSPCA in particular, and the leadership of Steve Coleman. I think it's fair to say that there are, notably in Victoria, there's been a Senate inquiry in WA, a similar inquiry has been heard. And I think that the push for those inquiries in those different state jurisdictions has often focused on potentially the wrong aspect. So you've got the RSPCA as an enforcement authority at a state level who's coming onto your farm to police animal welfare policy. Now, if you're policing it, you're doing that in the guidelines of the law. And with respect to caged egg farming, you're looking at cage sizes, stocking densities, and whether or not the production system's in good nick. The frustration of farmers at the coalface, particularly in those states, is that they've got guys knocking on the door wearing the RSPCA badge and uniform, and that the federal guys are clickbaiting every consumer around the land and asking them to sign a petition to ban caged egg production. So I would argue that the RSPCA's role in enforcing agriculture, or in enforcing animal welfare, is incredibly important, because like the sector's relationship with agricultural departments, it provides an on-the-ground connection of understanding. It's not dislocated by pot shots coming from Pitt Street. Now, I think you point to a complex relationship. I don't think it's simple, but I think it's fair to say that much of the campaign we'll see this year will certainly come from the RSPCA.
Greg Quinn. Two questions for you, John. One, first is, what's the view of the major supermarkets in this debate? Because obviously, in terms of sustainability of product, they're starting to have an influence on that. And obviously impact the producer and the consumer. And then secondly is, if 13 million eggs are consumed a day and 40% of those are free range and we have to convert in the worst case scenario, and we need resources to do that, because you need more land in that, and your production will fall. So is a consumer ready to pay 20 bucks for a carton of eggs as supply and demand, because consumption is trending upwards? Is a consumer educated and willing on an economic side to pay that?
I think it's, so again, I'll follow the pattern of going to the second question first. Hopefully I remember the first one. I think you're spot on. Like, what we know from supermarket scan data is about 26% of shoppers always buy caged eggs. That's the single biggest buying category that exists in the egg market. Only 19% of consumers buy free range or above all the time. Most people just dip in and dip out. The reason that 26% stays steady is kind of undiagnosed, but you don't need a degree to figure out why. It's the most affordable. Now, if our biggest segment of consumption is in the cheapest form of protein, then certainly there's a lesson in that for sustaining the supply of protein. Red meat prices with export deals are going north. Pretty much every other form of protein is going north, and we can do it for $4 a kilo. And what you're talking about, if you ban caged eggs, fundamentally, is making that form of protein less affordable for families who might otherwise not be able to access a form of protein for their kids. Now, there has been figures bandied around, and I think the RSPCA says 20 to $22 a year for a transition, and I reckon, like some of their other figures, that's pretty soft. We're not just looking at an increase in the price, we're not just looking at a denial of the cheapest form of protein. You shift production into shift egg production into other supply chains, and those prices are going to inflate too. So it's not just a matter of having to switch from caged eggs to barn and buying at the price point that we see on the shelf at the moment. Those prices are going to go north too. It's one of the fundamental questions that governments have to wrestle with this year, is whether they want to make food more expensive. In relation to the role of supermarkets, I think it's a really complex issue. I think it's an often quoted statistic that all of the major supply chains have made commitments to get out of caged eggs, which is just rubbish. It's not true. Coles has promised not to stock its home brand caged eggs, but they haven't made a commitment to phase it out of sales. Aldi has made a commitment, and they were the last ones to do so. That was 2025. And Woolworths has recently walked back their 2018 commitment to a 2025 goal. And that goal will depend on a number of factors, including consumer demand, industry capacity for supply. So, I don't know. I mean, there's the often talked about 2025 deadline. I'd say it's a 6-to-1 pop that they phase it out. And I wouldn't be putting my last on that if it was in the first agreement.
Question at the front table, and then we'll come to you, sir.
Thanks for your talk, John. Murray's coming from Australian War Innovation. Just a question on terminology, rights versus welfare. Where do you draw the line between animal rights activists and animal welfare activists, given that every farmer in Australia should be portrayed as the latter?
Yeah, that's a bloody good question. There obviously are animal rights activists, and PETA would probably classify themselves as an animal rights activist, which argues that no animal should be used in a form of production. But what we're seeing increasingly is bracket creep. Once credible animal welfare organisations, who are the voice of animals and are there to challenge industry, provide a counter thesis for us to respond to and improve to, have gradually have been essentially in a contest for campaign dollars. And they've been dragged and dragged and dragged more and more to the left, or the right, depending on which way you want to see things. I think, to be honest, it's incredibly hard nowadays to see the distinction between the two. And I think that's an enormous problem for an industry that needs an animal welfare, not an animal rights organisation, to have a meaningful dialogue with. Someone who's able to sit down at the table, agree to disagree, and to work on things that you can work on together to improve. Because a credible animal welfare organisation would have centrally as its mandate that industry should consistently and incrementally improve animal welfare. That's a space that both industry and, if someone's willing from an animal welfare movement to occupy, that we can share, and that there can be meaningful contributions made to those incremental improvements. But it's like we've lost the baby with the bathwater. We're deprived of that conversation because instead of it being a collaboration of ideas and agreement to disagree on some facts, it's just become a hostage negotiation. It's like my industry is just operating with a gun to its head. Phase out of caged eggs or else. Give us a phase out date or we pull the trigger on the campaign. That's not a collaborative process, and whilst it doesn't go directly to where the line is, I think it's instructive in talking about the way in which that line has been blurred.
Question from Serena.
Just a quick one. could talk, John, very interesting, because we've done lots of talks and you shorten it a lot. But short is good for social media, and when I did the story yesterday, so I'm sorry for the ABC, Choice, an unlikely looking kind of animal rights activist, was the one I went to. So are you dealing with a plethora of animal rights activists and in the form of consumer groups? And to counter their Clucker app, which is a measure of the egg carton and whether it's the Hilton style of egg stocking, hen stocking, or whether it's a mosh pit, as they describe it. Are you countering that with a social media campaign?
Yeah, so on Choice, I think it's been an incredibly interesting experience for the farming community. They became something of a surprising and unlikely opponent. We didn't really see that coming, but once we did, we quickly understood that it wasn't really an opportunity to engage on the principal point of what consumers expected and what would be delivered for them, and it was turned into largely a discussion which was completely disconnected from the reality of farming, that had nothing to do with consumer expectations. In fact, the point that I raised in an early meeting with representatives of Choice was that our research and their research found the exact same things with respect to free-range egg production. Notably too, the initial Choice report in 2015, which simply argued for stocking density to be put on pack, once the industry agreed to that, they moved the goalposts again. So I do think activism is starting to leak out into other areas of interest groups. And I think that's probably just the nature of the activist movement altogether. And certainly, in some respects, Choice does incredibly important work, but with respect to the free-range debate, I reckon they certainly didn't get up to the animal welfare, the animal rights line. They certainly crossed into the animal welfare debate, and that's what was articulated. What was the second?
Social media and Clucker. And
yeah, so
how do you own that space?
I think, as I said today, we should all expect a campaign. What I didn't say is that it's not really something that the egg industry intends to do. We're not going to waste money on billboards. We're not going to spend a lot of coin on media spots, ironically because we don't have it. What we are going to do is try and get this debate back into the sensible centre. And that involves not simplifying things. As I've said at the end, embracing complexity, being willing to have a dialogue with people, being willing to open up and just talk about the facts. And the facts include, and facts that are never part of the campaign, are disadvantages. You know, I'm not afraid to say caged egg production doesn't just have advantages, it has disadvantages too. Confinement is a disadvantage. And if you don't like confinement, we're giving you a way to shop out of it. So I guess it's a kind of long-winded way of saying we're not buying the campaign ticket. It's going to happen around us, but our commitment is to stay the middle course, stay the middle road, to have the conversations that don't simply crystallise and simplify and mischaracterise either us or our opponents, just talk about the facts.